It's My Nerd World, a Star Wars Plus show, and on this week's episode, my thoughts on Ahsoka, Episode 5, Shadow Warrior, best live-action episode ever? I'll give you my thoughts. Plus, we got your listener feedback this week. The Jon Justice, the Jon Justice at gmail.com if you want to email. Of course, you can leave a comment up on YouTube as well, and if you want to support My Nerd World, head on over to mynerdworld.net and check out the science fiction space opera adventure series EMBARK, available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook on amazon.com, Jon Justice, or at mynerdworld.net. And let's get into this week's episode.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
It is My Nerd World, and welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice, here to talk once again about Star Wars here on a Star Wars Plus show. I thank you so much for checking out the episode. Got listener feedback coming up here in just a moment, but let's dive into it. Ahsoka, Episode 5, Shadow Warrior. We only have 3 episodes of this amazing series season yet. And was this the best live-action episode ever? It was pretty darn good. Dave Filoni is knocking it out of the park with this show. And it, for me, and, you know, for this fan, it really seems clear that Dave Filoni is the guy moving forward. I know we're going to get a movie that is supposed to be the culmination of everything in this Mandoverse era. I almost want to call it the Ahsoka-verse era, just because I feel like this Ahsoka series is so much stronger than everything that's come before it. I like Mando. Mando's different. And I know The Mandalorian is more of a lot of individuals' cup of tea, along with Andor. What Ahsoka is doing here is the best live-action Star Wars, in my opinion, that we've seen yet, that really embodies all of what Star Wars is. We're getting the references, the storytelling of the past and what we've seen come before it by telling this new tale. And this episode specifically really captured what so many of us really enjoyed about the prequels, elevated what we'd seen in the prequels and in the Clone Wars animated series. So many moments could have fallen flat or not worked, and it worked on every single level. And one of the things that I'm really appreciating about Ahsoka, and I've mentioned this since the start of the show, and it's turned out to be true, is that we're not getting your Mandalorian adventure of the week. The show is designed that way for The Mandalorian, very much like a video game level. You have a goal in mind, but you got to complete this task before you can ultimately go and complete the goal and move on to the next element. Even going beyond Rebels, which had its fair share of filler episodes, we're getting one cohesive story. And in and of itself, every episode plays out with this beginning, middle, and end. And while we're left with cliffhangers, I'm reminded throughout each of these episodes, sort of the ending of The Empire Strikes Back, where you're left wondering what's going to happen with Han Solo, but yet you still had this sense of satisfaction that you got a complete story. And Episode 5 certainly went and fit that bill. This felt like its own mini movie in and of itself. So let's just get into it a bit. The only complaint that I have about the episode, and it's not even really a complaint, is that we didn't get any Sabine. Not surprising. Much like The Force Awakens, where we didn't get any Luke Skywalker. And I've said many times that I didn't need our original heroes in the sequel trilogy. I'm glad that they were there for the time that they were there, but I was not one that was clamoring to see our aging stars from the original trilogy in a new set of movies. I knew this was about and was fine with it being about a new generation of characters. And while the focal point of The Force Awakens was the search for Luke Skywalker, we didn't get him until the very end, and that was satisfying. And here we didn't get any Sabine, but her lack of presence and her absence was felt throughout the movie. I said movie, didn't I? Was felt throughout the show. That being said, what it was filled with and almost replaced with being Anakin, because we're probably not going to get much more Anakin, if any, in the rest of this series, and a younger Ahsoka ended up filling in that void, because I really love that Sabine character, and I think that actress is doing a spectacular job. The opening of the episode was very subtle and ominous. I love how Hera, played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead, has really come into her own in this series. I now see her as Hera, where those first few episodes I was a little bit put off because I'm so used to seeing the cartoon version and hearing Vanessa Marshall's voice. Now she's the embodiment of Hera, especially seeing her around Jason Syndulla. But you have her cautiously stepping into the temple in the absence of Ahsoka and Sabine, not knowing where they are. The music is very ominous. The sound production of the episode was spectacular. You know, Jason coming down and asking, "Hey, Mom, can I come out now?" And of course, leading into the opening title card of Ahsoka, you see Hu Yang there on the cliffside with Sabine's helmet and saying those lines, and what I mentioned last week on the show of I told them to stay together. They didn't listen to me. And here you have Hu Yang emoting as a droid and showing this level of emotion. You could really feel, oddly, the pain within his circuits in that moment, and their search and desire to find out what had happened to Ahsoka. And then, of course, we get into the world between worlds. But it's not the world between worlds that we saw in Rebels. It was, but they changed it up, which is fine. Not really 100% sure whether Ahsoka is, and I have my own theory on this, and I'll share it with you, but whether or not this all happened within her mind. Was she actually in the world between worlds? In my opinion, it's pretty clear that she was in the world between worlds, seeing that Jason was able to hear her. The portal of the world between worlds ended up being somewhere out in the water, and whether or not that was simply a matter of location for Ahsoka, that she could have been anywhere in that moment, having been defeated by Baylan Skoll, and wherever she would end up being, wherever her resting place would be in that moment after defeat, would end up opening up a portal to the world between worlds, or whether or not that actually there was actually one there. The ambiguity there I'm completely fine with, and I'm convinced she did go to another place. It's been said on many other shows, and Dave Filoni has said this. He's a huge fan of Lord of the Rings. There is no doubt, and he said as much, that there were callbacks to Lord of the Rings, and this was very much akin to Gandalf the Grey becoming Gandalf the White after his fight with the Balrog. And here you had Ahsoka having to go through her final training session and her own trial with Anakin. Now, what's interesting to me is she's coming out on the other side, and I don't have this thought that we now have Ahsoka the Jedi. I think in this case, typically you would have a Jedi in training or a Padawan go through their trials and come out to be a Jedi, but here she was already there. She just was never able to complete it to that point. And we got the answer for me as to why Ahsoka was the way that she was in those first 4 episodes. A lot of people, myself included, picked up on the fact that Ahsoka was very stoic. I mean, her clothes were drab. We've seen her in this before, but even from what we'd seen in previous live-action form, especially in the Book of Boba Fett episode where she's there with Luke Skywalker, she had a different demeanor. But in these opening episodes, she was just very subdued, very stoic, and in hindsight, not completely engaged in what was going on. Clearly concerned, clearly going on this journey and trying to figure out what's happening with Morgan Elsbeth and the search for Thrawn and trying to stop them while making sure that they can get to Ezra if they can. But it still felt like to me she was holding back. And after she goes through what she goes through with Anakin in The World Between Worlds, I feel like she came out on the other side and we got a different Ahsoka, a renewed Ahsoka. And again, this Gandalf the White, Ahsoka the White, pretty one-to-one comparison, but her demeanor had changed. By the time, and I'll jump to the end of the episode, when she gets on the T6 with Hu Yang and they fly into the mouth of the Purrgil, she doesn't know where they're going to end up, and she's fine with that. She's following her instincts now, and her vibe was completely different. I've heard a lot of people asking the question, and I had a friend at work was asking, what was ultimately the point of her going on this journey with Anakin in The World Between Worlds? What was the training? What was he trying to accomplish? For me, and I think there's a lot of takeaways here. I think it's very ambiguous, and you can take away whatever, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at what Anakin was trying to accomplish. For me, it was best said when she made the comment that she didn't want to fight, and he says, "Well, then you're going to die." Again, this goes back to Ahsoka being so stoic in the first part of the series, reluctant to, and I should probably focus in on this, reluctant to go and train Sabine, whereas I think now, and she even mentioned as much in those opening episodes, saying, I walked away from my master the same way that I walked away from Sabine. She hadn't gone and completed anything, or hadn't completed these important parts. It was something that me personally, that I could relate to when I was growing up, and much, much younger, living at home. My father would call me half-assed man or half-assed boy at the time, because I would take the trash to the garbage, but I wouldn't take the garbage can out to the curb, that kind of thing. And I know throughout my life, I've always felt like I'm one step away from going and achieving a certain thing. In my BMX racing career, I did good, but I didn't do great. I've always strived to do more in my radio career. I've had a really long, successful career, but I still haven't felt like I've reached that one part. And a lot of times, it's misguided. We don't see the success where we should be seeing it, or don't take advantage of success where we should be taking advantage of it. And a lot of times we need a shift in perspective. It's all a matter of a point of view to realize that perhaps you've been a lot more successful than you thought. You've just been looking for success in the wrong places. I think for Ahsoka, she needed to finish that final training to almost to go back and say, I never finished it with Anakin, and now I finished it with Anakin, and now I can move forward with these other things that I haven't finished yet. Give Sabine the opportunity that she has. And as I mentioned before, this, you fight or you die. You got to be committed to it moving forward. All right, so let's get into a bit of what we saw within The World Between Worlds. I thought what they did with the special effects was fantastic for the show. Matches everything that you would expect and the quality that we're expecting from a live-action TV show. It is certainly a TV show. It is not up to the cinematic par than what we got in Andor. That being said, I'm not put off by any of that. I actually appreciated the way in which they obscured a lot of the background in The World Between Worlds on the planets, specifically the siege of Mandalore and the amount of dust being kicked up. Very reminiscent to when the Trade Federation ship crashed in Attack of the Clones, the dust kicked up, and you had all the clone troopers running through the cloud of dust, firing their weapons. Also reminiscent of what we saw in Solo that I thought was disappointing when they were on Mimban in the beginning of that film, and the geography was so clouded by the atmosphere in the air. And it was done for budget purposes back then, but on a big screen cinematic level, and I was bummed out because I would have liked to have seen more. Here, for television, I felt like it worked very well. The girl who played young Ahsoka is the same actress who played the very young Gamora in Infinity War and Endgame, and the one after Thanos, spoiler alert, goes and snaps his finger, and he goes to this other ethereal plane, and the young Gamora says, did you do it? What did it cost? And he says everything. That's the same actress. Loved her as young Ahsoka. I know we're probably not going to get it, but I would love to see more Clone Wars in live action using that actress as young Ahsoka. And one of the things I probably appreciated about it most was that it rounded out the Ahsoka character in live action for me now. I enjoy, and I've been enjoying Rosario Dawson's performance as Ahsoka, but my love for the animated character voiced by Ashley Eckstein kept superseding that because I kept trying to reconcile the two. Now that we have a younger Ahsoka in live action, I'm able to now round out my live action Ahsoka, and I can see the older Ahsoka in the young Ahsoka and the young Ahsoka in the older Ahsoka. And I thought the way that Dave Filoni handled that was masterful. And taking a much older Hayden Christensen as Anakin Skywalker and bringing him through those different eras, changing the hairstyle to match the animation. Of course, the armor that he's wearing. I mean, they didn't miss a beat, and they nailed every single aspect of what I would have expected in seeing either prequel Anakin. The lightsaber fights were spectacular, to say the least. They've been the best of any live action show so far, and they're even as good as what we saw within the sequel trilogy. Certainly as good, if not better, than what we saw in The Last Jedi and The Force Awakens. Almost on par with The Rise of Skywalker, because I thought those lightsaber battles in that film were incredible and some of the best in the entire series, even better than what we saw in the prequels. Seeing live action Gen 1 clone troopers, seeing Captain Rex, I mean, it just hit all those right notes. And it lends itself to the prequels. Like, I can't wait to go back and watch the prequels now in light of seeing this and going back and revisiting Hayden Christensen's character. I think it adds more depth and weight to his character in Revenge of the Sith. Not that it needed it, but it certainly does for me. They all complement each other. When we get back to the world between worlds and off of the planets within the world between worlds, the moment of final conflict between Anakin and Ahsoka, where we have those flashes of Darth Vader as a menacing Anakin is moving forward, holding the red lightsaber, which we hadn't seen before in non-suited Darth Vader Anakin in that moment. And of course, the turning of the tables as she ends up getting the lightsaber in her hand and shuts it off before striking him down. The Sith eyes go away, and Anakin returns in that moment. Just incredibly powerful. Those glimpses and those flashes of Vader, to do that in live action, because we've seen that before in animation. And as a matter of fact, you go back to the original micro series of the Clone Wars, and we got, I felt a lot of parallels to that within this series. And again, if you haven't gone back and watched that micro series, you really need to. But these moments, and I'll talk about one coming up, where you kind of go, this seems weird for Star Wars, and then you remember, but it's not weird for Star Wars. We've seen this stuff before. We've just seen it in animated form, and they're able to pull it off in live action. And of course, you finally get at the end, the way that they handle her coming out of the world between worlds, floating there in the water to be rescued by the ghost, and I'll get back to that in just a moment. A lot of talk, and again, I think there's ambiguity to exactly how this played out. Who was Anakin in the world between worlds? I did think it was interesting early on in the fight when Ahsoka says to him, "I will not fight you." Anakin says, "I've heard that before." That could be a reference to when they fought in Rebels in the Dark Temple, when we thought that she had died, only for her to be pulled out at the last minute by Ezra in the World Between Worlds episode in episode 4. She says, she basically says something similar to, "I will not fight you." But it also could be a callback to Luke in Return of the Jedi. That's the way that I took it. When he's saying, "I will not fight you, Father," he said, "I've heard this before," which makes me believe that this was indeed Anakin's Force ghost in the World Between Worlds. I thought the moment when they were down for the Siege of Mandalore, and it was interesting seeing the Mando Mauls, the Mandalorians with the horns on their heads, right? We saw that in season 7 of the Mandalorian. But when the young Ahsoka mentions to Anakin how dark what ends up happening to him, and he kind of gives this, "Is that what this is all about?" Like he doesn't want to accept the fact that he became Darth Vader. Again, my assumption that this is a Force ghost, Anakin. In the middle of while this is going on, we have the search taking place above the planet. All the moments between Jason and Hera I thought were spectacular. Going back to the beginning of the episode when Jason hears the lightsabers and he asks Hera to come and listen, you can sense the urgency in her voice when she says, "We're going out there. We're gonna find him." The shots of the ghost over the water were, some of them, freeze frame, give me the poster of it, spectacular. And apparently they made some actual physical models of both the T6 and the ghost, and then put them in with the CGI environments. And so that's potentially why they look so, because I was noticing those shots of either the CGI model was that great or those were actual models they used for the ghost in those moments. But just again, absolutely spectacular. I'm just in love with that ship. Carson from the New Republic is great in that role. I love how in the episode they walk the audience through, and they need to, for those that aren't familiar with Rebels, talking about Jason hearing the lightsabers. How in the world does he know that? And Hu Yang tells Carson, Jason has abilities. His father was a Jedi, and Carson responds with, "Okay." The moment when they're in the World Between Worlds and Ahsoka becomes young Ahsoka, and she goes, "This is the Clone Wars." It was so meta because that's what we were doing as the audience. We're in the Clone Wars, and Anakin gives that, "Well, yeah, what, this kind of thing." Fantastic. I can't say enough good things about this episode. Now, my prediction on the one hand came true. We didn't get, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in listener feedback. So it wasn't the burn within Ahsoka's hand that ended up providing them the opportunity to go to the other galaxy. They did go and use the Purrgil, though. And what could have easily been really cheesy and could have fallen flat absolutely worked with Ahsoka on the outside of the T6 and having a Force moment with that massive Purrgil. Seeing this in Rebels translated to live action, I think, helps. But it is still wholly Star Wars. We've seen individuals standing on the tops of ships before. This isn't necessarily new, even though you want to go, "This seems odd." It's not. It's Star Wars. And even the moment when they fly the T6 into the mouth of the Purrgil, you're kind of going, they're going to go into the mouth of this giant creature? And then you go, we've done this before. We did this in The Empire Strikes Back with the space slug. So yeah, this is absolutely appropriate. It totally works. It totally makes sense. The Purrgil leaving the planet and then passing by the New Republic fleet. The nod at the beginning of the episode, too, needs a mention of Senator Organa can only, cover you for so long. Obviously, a nod to Leia. I almost don't hope we get a live-action Leia in the series just because I feel like it'll take us out of what's really been a great series. It's so hard to look at these legacy characters knowing they're not with us anymore and to see these different versions, including Luke Skywalker from the Book of Boba Fett. So where do we go from here? I honestly don't know. I know a bit of spoilers. I won't share them with him here about how the series might end up, and I'm totally fine with how it's going. How we get there, I have no clue. So what I share with you now is pure speculation on my part. I was a little surprised we didn't have Hera go along to this other galaxy with them, which makes me believe with 3 episodes left, the next episode is probably going to be focused on whatever galaxy they go to. Hera is going to have to go deal with the New Republic, and I think at the end of the series, that situation with her being on thin ice with the New Republic, not being able to provide any evidence of the missions that she's been on. They've lost people in the New Republic when the ship took off, the massive hyperspace ring took off in episode number 4. So I think when hopefully Ahsoka and Sabine come back from this galaxy, they'll be able to provide the evidence necessary to convince the New Republic, hey, there's a problem taking place. There's also, in my mind, the possibility, although I think it's very remote, that they don't come back from this other galaxy. Now, we're supposed to get a second season of Ahsoka. A lot of that is up in the air because of the writer and director strike. But that being said, them being in another galaxy would certainly make sense as to why they were absent for all of what took place in the sequel trilogy. Of course, there are always ways for them to get around that. They could end up going back to that galaxy. We know the Ghost is in the sequel trilogy, right? It ends up showing up in The Rise of Skywalker, and we obviously know it didn't go off to whatever galaxy that Ezra and Thrawn are in. I think there's a question, too, of whether or not Ezra does return. I would imagine he does, but at the same time, and again, I don't know any spoilers, I'm incredibly curious to see just how Thrawn and Ezra survived and what they've been doing this whole time. My mind has no idea on where to go, what this other galaxy is going to look like. Is it going to be a galaxy filled with species and people and life, or is this just going to be a place that they've been surviving in this whole time all by themselves? So, I mean, where we go from here, I mean, this is completely new territory that we've never seen before. So I imagine the next episode is going to be them there coming back, or the next episode and the other one will be them coming back, and then the final episode will be some sort of standoff with a returning Thrawn. Where we go from there, I have no idea. I believe this is supposed to be setting up to give us the beginnings of the First Order. So we could potentially see references either directly or indirectly to whatever Palpatine is doing or perhaps what Snoke is doing. Either way, these next 3 episodes are nothing but a complete and utter mystery. I just hope Sabine makes it back. That's going to typically, I'm like, hey, when people go, they go, right, in these shows. But, man, I'm really enjoying this character and what this actress is doing with her. So I really hope that we don't lose her in this series. I'm a little worried, though, considering it's been established that she doesn't have her family anymore. So what do you think? The Jon Justice, Jon, the Jon, Jon Justice at gmail.com. Drop me an email if you happen to be listening on YouTube. Leave me a comment there. I would love your thoughts on this week's episode and your expectations moving forward. What is this other galaxy going to be like? I still say that hyperspace ring is bringing back the Chimera. And we're going to see that there have been forces that have been amassing for a while. And once Thrawn is back, and that was alluded to in Mandalorian Season 3, which runs parallel to this, there's a moment when they have the gathering of all the officials with Moff Gideon in midway through Mandalorian Season 3. And one of the former Imperial generals says, Thrawn's return, which could even either mean he has returned or they know he's going to return. So, what do you think? The Jon Justice, Jon at gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube. All right, let's get into some of your listener feedback this week.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Friend of the show, Edwin Lowe, writes, I'm enjoying Ahsoka and your reviews. It was definitely a shot in the arm I needed to get back my Star Wars fix. I agree. One thought I had about the Force in the prequels, the Jedi were found and brought to the temple immediately when they discovered they had the Force. Does that change anything of how it's viewed now in the age of Star Wars we are in with the lore or canon? I guess you can say that everyone has the Force, but the one is strong in it in an early age were identified immediately. Giving you my thoughts on Episode 5, I loved it. Seeing now a live-action scene from the Clone Wars TV show was truly amazing. The de-aging of Anakin looked great, and his performance was great. Also, seeing young Ahsoka was amazing, too. I trust you and your family are doing well. We are, and may the Force be with you, Edwin. Yeah, I seem to agree with what you were saying here with regard to the Force. My takeaway is that some people are just stronger with it than other people are. Other people need to go and develop their talents. We really have kind of moved away from the midichlorian aspect of this. Now, that being said, if you apply midichlorians to it, some individuals are stronger with the Force because they have a higher midichlorian count than others. I think there's a way to reconcile this within the current canon, even though we don't talk about it anymore. We've mentioned M counts, you assume midichlorians, within the new set of storytelling, specifically when it comes to Grogu. So perhaps everybody can tap into the Force, but if you have a low midichlorian count, it's harder to go and do, and you have to refine your skill further. I would like to see at some point in time just something in passing to go and address that fact. So does Sabine have midichlorians, or does she not? And how do midichlorians play into it? Because there's no removing that from the canon. And again, just saying it out loud, M count as it relates to Grogu would lend itself to that still being something that's a part of current canon as it relates to Force sensitivity in individuals. So if you have further thoughts on that, if you've read something within any of the canon stories that can provide further details on that, I would really appreciate it. Drop me an email, thejonjustice@gmail.com. Russ writes, and it turns out that this didn't happen, but I sure hope they don't lean on the hand imprint to travel to unknown regions. That is so weak. They didn't. They have both potentially the knowledge from the world between worlds and the Purrgil, which transported Thrawn and Ezra the first time. Both are much better options than portions of a sphere which required hours of access in that hedge for others to travel. Yeah, and as we saw, Russ, that didn't end up being the case, and I tend to agree with you. I thought it would have been unique, but there would have been some hoops that would have needed to have been jumped through to make that actually go and work. That wraps up the show for this week. Before I let you go, if you happen to be new to My Nerd World, a Star Wars Plus show, and you like to read, I hope you will go support My Nerd World and the podcast that I do by picking up your preferred copy of any of the books in my EMBARK science fiction space opera series. The books are all telling one big, long story. The first three books tell a trilogy. There's a fourth book that's a bit of its own individual story while still leading into the second trilogy. That being said, I did write all the books to be written on their own. So each book gives you enough background on what's happened before so you won't be completely out of touch. 7 books in all in the series, available in ebook, Kindle Unlimited, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook. And you can purchase paperbacks from me directly and have them autographed for free if you'd like. Slightly cheaper than what you would purchase on Amazon.com, especially the shipping, and I usually get it out within a few days of your request of whatever book you would like to get your hands on. As Earth faces its end, you can follow pilots Taft, Katha, and their crew on a journey of survival across the galaxy as they fight for humanity's future. Again, available at Amazon.com. Search for Jon, Jon Justice, or mynerdworld.net. You can hit the links there on the homepage and check that out. So it's your way to support My Nerd World and the podcast I produce here. Treat yourself, a friend, or a family member with sci-fi. Again, written for adults, but great for ages 11 plus. Start off by picking it up EMBARK Book 1 today, but check them all out. You can start off with any of the books in the series, and again, you won't be lost in doing so. As a matter of fact, the final book in the series, 7, Battle Planet, has been selling by itself rather well, which surprised me. So yeah, check out the books. I really would appreciate it. And they're all priced to sell. You can actually pick up book 1 in ebook right now. Free, obviously, on Kindle Unlimited, but book 1 for just 99 cents. So mynerdworld.net or amazon.com. Thank you so much for checking out the podcast. As always, if you're listening on YouTube, like and subscribe to the channel, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening to, whatever platform you're using. And I'll be back again next week with my thoughts on Ahsoka Episode 6. Until that time, I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, and you're safe. I'll talk to you then. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.